Alright, so we're going to try something a bit new for the channel. I'm going to review a couple of different designers' work. They've sent me some DMs after I put a tweet out and an Instagram post. And we're going to go through, we're going to critique them, have a little look at what others are doing. And yeah, I mean, there's not much more to it. We'll just get started. So this one is from Ben Fox Media. I think the pose on Ronaldo is sick. Ronaldo does Ronaldo things, right? Looking at it, I mean, I think my critique would be, where is the blue light coming from? Because we've not got any identifier as to like why there is this light source, where is this light source coming from, etc. I would potentially drop, I'm not sure who the player is, sorry, I'm not super on top of football players these days. I would potentially either not have him in and leave Ronaldo as this main focal point, or the same way that you've blurred out the football, which I would have blurred out these sort of extraneous bits of sort of grass and turf and stuff. These are in focus, the ball isn't, which doesn't make sense from a camera perspective. I would blur those out, and I would probably blur him out or just not have him at all, because he's not really adding anything and it's throwing off the composition a little bit. Just because you've got this scale of Ronaldo, he's almost bigger than the stadium, which is fine. It's almost like the camera is lower, but he's throwing that perspective off a little bit. So I would get rid of him probably, rather than even blur him, but it'd be up to you. If there was a blue light coming from above or something, then this would make all these lighting bits that you've added in, which look really cool, it would make them make sense. So I'm just adding in, hypothetically, just an overlay. So if you had an overlay like this, it will just change the color. If there was something like this going on, it would justify having the blue light coming down, whereas obviously without it, the person can't sort of identify that. Maybe if the moon was the same color or something, then that would kind of give us the impression. You could have some spill coming from over the top of the stadium, that type of thing. And if you were keeping him in, you would put some blue over him, some softer blue. I mean, yeah, you could go wild with it. I think at the moment it just needs a few tweaks, and I think you're onto a winner. Next on the screen is Andy Jam Design, Daniel Ricciardo, one of my favourite drivers. Yeah. Right, what to say about this? So I think I really like the composition here. Really cool having him kind of sat on the car. I think the scaling is a little bit off. Danny would be a little bit smaller, just looking at the size of the car to him. So I'd maybe make him a little bit smaller. If you've got this really strong light source here on the wheel, then that light source needs to reflect onto him. So real quick exposure layer, I would, and obviously not as strong as this because this is kind of OTT. I'm doing this super quick, but I would have light coming all the way down here. I would probably say this is a little bit too dark. If everything is as dark as his leg here, that would mean that the shadow under the car is going to be really, really dark, and there's not too much of an there's not like a solid shadow going on pretty much anywhere on here. So I would, just to sell how dark Danny is and the rest of him, I mean, I wouldn't have him that dark personally, but if there's a shadow going on about here, if there's again very quick shadows going along down there, it kind of explains why his leg at the back is so dark. Personally, I would just crank both of these up. I mean, if this is a low-res image, I would replace it with a higher-res one, just because it looks a little bit blown out in some of the places. Like the text is quite pixelated, and that might be just from where I've downloaded this from our conversation. But yeah, maybe get a higher-res image of this car. But I think otherwise, it's pretty cool. Maybe reduce some of the noise, but I think like stylistically, it's quite cool. I like how you managed to get your name into the L. As I said, just not have him so dark, and make sure that if you've got a light source which is coming from this sort of left hand side to cast a light here, you would just assume that the light continues like that. So in that case, you're going to go back and then give him brightness here, and just not have it such a polar opposite to the right side, which is quite dark, because then you end up where it kind of looks like he's in a dark room with a really bright light on him rather than sort of outside sunny vibes, which you've got with the background, etc. So yeah, yeah, I just think a few little bits here and there, but otherwise this is pretty solid, mate. Nice one. So we've got this really cool Lewandowski.
Could be more here. This is Lewandowski with a header. There is
Morgan R design here. I think this is pretty bang on. There's a few things I would probably suggest. So I think down here, I would go for more shadow. If you've got such dark bits here where his foot is, that means there's a really strong light source. So I would probably do something along those lines. Probably wouldn't have the shadow over his foot though, because now he's got like one blackened boot, whereas the other one isn't. And I'm assuming that's where the shadow's been put over. I'm not a football boot expert. This has just been kicking balls that hard, maybe. I don't know. He's a pretty good player. So I think the only thing I would say is maybe if you'd feathered him out and had him kind of within the constraints of the inner circle, I would actually leave this arm hanging out because it looks quite strong. There's more kind of going on. It gives a bit more depth. But if you were to, let me delete that one, feather everything outside of, so you know, this section here, just so it was in line with the circle, I think that would just really add to it. And I would probably do the same for him up to and get rid of this section as well and rub that bit out. And I think then he's kind of constrained within here, and it's him within the logo, within the badge. It just makes a bit more visual sense, I think, rather than having this overhang here because it's conflicting with the M. You just want to kind of have that separation, I think. Whack the contrast up a bit because it ends up looking a little bit washed out. Because if I take it all the way off, it's super chalky at this point. But if you start to put more vibrance back into it, maybe not exposure, highlight, something like that, a little bit of a boost, bit more blacks in there as well, I think you end up losing a lot of that shadow is kind of missing. Something like that, I guess. It just gives it a bit more pop, a bit more punch, and it's just a bit more visually in your face. I really like the text in the background. It just kind of adds a bit more visual interest, a few little things here and there, but otherwise, yeah, pretty decent. The next one is from Skillzo XO. Skillzo. I'm going to say Skillzo. If I'm butchering your name, mate, I'm really sorry. Yeah, Charles Leclerc. I think on this one, there's not too much I can really critique because I quite like it a lot. Dark, gritty style. I do think it probably needs a little bit more brightness. Probably the car specifically is a little bit dark. You'll just have to ignore the fact that the helmet is super blown out now, but just bringing a bit more of the colour back in. So I think what you're doing is the polar opposite of Morgan. Morgan's taking a lot of the contrast out of his design. I think just putting a little bit back into it, whether it's via vibrance in camera raw or maybe saturation in camera raw, or even the clarity can actually bring a little bit of the sort of darkness back into it. I think you're doing the opposite of that. You've gone the other way, so you're putting a lot of contrast into it, which gives it really cool, like gloomy, sort of gritty, dark. I think if you put some more saturation back into it, you can keep the gloomy, you can keep the dark and gritty, but also kind of have it pop off the page a little bit more. But just putting the vibrance back into it gives it a lot more impact. So it's just a small thing, but it could go a long way. And I think you'll just have to experiment and try to find that sweet spot of doing that. But otherwise, I think this is a pretty solid edit. I like it. Looks like an old Polaroid or something. So this one's from Pedro Mattos on Twitter. There's a lot going on here, and I'm here for it. All right, so I would probably say have the fans. I would push them up, and then I would feather out the bottom of it. So this is probably not the best picture in the world to explain what I'm saying, but it's very similar and they're Palmeiras fans.
Passou pelo meio, desvio!
If we grab these dudes, I would probably have them higher up, is what I'm saying. So if you had them up there, that there, and then I would pretty much, look at this blue, I'd blur them out at the bottom, and then you'd still have obviously this going on as well. Because what will happen is you'll then kind of isolate out the Palmeiras logo. Because the background is so busy, then at least it just singles it out and isolates it a little bit more. It would probably be good if there was some other kind of colours going on in this, because at the moment, if I take all this off, this is quite monochrome. So we've only got one shade of green going on here. If I just add an overlay in, now you've kind of broken up all of this. I mean, and there's nothing to say that you can't use just green, but if you've got varying shades of it, it just adds a lot of visual interest to it. Rather than it all just being the same color and your eye just kind of not being bored, but there's not lots of things for it to start, for your eye to look down on the bottom left, look at the top right, look at what's going on over there. You know, you're just kind of like presented with this thing. So something like this is super subtle, but that is the kind of thing that just makes it a lot less monochrome and adds that visual interest to keep the eye looking at different things and to dwell on it longer. So again, you know, I'm doing this very rough on top of what you've already done, but yeah, I would just find some overlays, and then I would just run this entirely through Camera Raw filter and just give it that little bit more pop, I guess. If we add some more texture in, put some clarity in, maybe we dehaze it, wee bit of vibrance. You know, you get the gist of what I'm saying, but it will just kind of add a little bit more to what you've done. But I think again, you've got the basics down for sure. You know, just those few little overlays, you know, down here, overlay up here. You know, maybe there's something over here as well, and then you could add some lighting in to, you know, the left hand side here, the left hand side of his face here. It's a matter of fine tuning and seeing what works, what doesn't work, and just trying to add things in there someone will want to stare at for, you know, the more than what is it they say, 3 seconds on social media that people stare at images. You're trying to keep people's attention, so something like overlays is always good. Maybe some text would be good as well, because I'm not sure, because I know nothing about Palmeiras. I'm assuming this is the same guy, so maybe you could put some text here and it be behind him in the foreground. But yeah, that's the great thing about design, right? There's so many different avenues and ways to look at it. I think we've got some solid work there for sure. You know, we'll see moving forward if we make this to a series, what happens with it. But it's definitely a lot of fun to kind of go through, sort of see the awesome work people are putting out, and just kind of, yeah, trying to give a little bit of advice here and there, and try to give things that final pop and jazz it up, as they say.
Jazz!
So yeah, once again, massive thank you to everyone. And if you want to see your work featured in the future, then definitely drop me a message on your favorite social media. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.